Greetings and salutations. Thank you for lending an ear to The Voice of the Times this Tuesday, November 10, 2020. For today's editorial, the Philippines should reject the mail-in voting system that disfigured the U.S. election. Senate President Vicente Sotto III is indubitably right in warning the nation this early against any proposal for the adoption of the mail-in voting system in Philippine elections. Some starry-eyed legislator in our Congress might imagine that adopting the system would be a good way to ingratiate our country with the incoming U.S. president if Joe Biden is confirmed as the duly elected candidate. He would not be where he is now without mail-in or postal voting. A Wikipedia article explains the intricacies of the system. It says, postal voting is voting in an election where ballot papers are distributed to electors and typically returned by post, in contrast to electors voting in person at a polling station or electronically via an electronic voting system. In a given election, postal votes may be available on demand or limited to individuals meeting certain criteria, such as a proven inability to travel to a designated polling place. Most electors are required to apply for a postal vote, although some may receive one by default. In some elections, postal voting is the only voting method allowed and is referred to as all postal voting. With the exception of those elections, postal votes constitute a form of early voting and may be considered an absentee ballot. Typically, postal votes must be mailed back before the scheduled election day. However, in some jurisdictions, return methods may allow for dropping off of the ballot in person via secure drop boxes or at voting centers. Postal votes may be processed by hand or scanned and counted electronically. The history of postal voting dates back to the 19th century, and modern-day procedures and availability vary by jurisdiction. Electoral laws typically stipulate a series of checks to protect against voter fraud and allow for the integrity and secrecy of the submitted ballot to be maintained. The 2020 U.S. presidential election will enter history, not just for the election of the 46th President of the United States, who could be Joe Biden. It will be remembered even more as an election wherein the losing President Donald Trump is claiming in the many legal suits that he has filed in various states, large-scale election fraud and irregularities were perpetrated in order to manufacture a Democratic victory in the election. Although Soto singled out the mail-in ballot system as an easy tool to use for election cheating, there were other equally egregious practices allegedly employed in the recent U.S. election that disfigured the electoral process, among them post-election voting and absentee voting. All these should be carefully avoided by our legislature. Senator Soto issued his comments when he was asked by reporters for his thoughts on whether the mail-in voting system will work in the Philippines if we adopt it in case there is still a coronavirus threat by the time we hold our own national elections in 2022. Explaining his position, Soto said, "No, I'm not in favor of adopting it." He then asked rhetorically, "Sino tatanggap? Nationwide? Saan padala sa post office? Kailan bibilangin? Sino bibilang? Who will receive the ballots? Nationwide? Where will the voters mail their ballots? In post offices? When will the votes be counted? Who will count them?" He added, "Paano kung may mag-leak ng what if someone leaks the results, whether true or fake? Any of those procedures can be cheated." Some election analysts contend that without postal voting and post-election voting, Joe Biden would not have gathered the millions of votes that he is reported to have received. Very likely, President Trump would already have been proclaimed as re-elected. The main reason why the U.S. made a big shift to postal voting this year was the desire of the U.S. state governments to prevent the exposure of citizens to COVID-19 and crowded polling stations during the pandemic. To think now of mail-in voting for our 2022 elections, in our case, is incredibly foolish and defeatist. And that's the editorial for Tuesday, November 10, 2020. For more news and information, get a copy of the Manila Times on print, subscribe to our digital edition, or log on to www.manilatimes.net. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and listen to The Voice of the Times.